thank you for sharing with us and leading us in worship. It's good to see you all in the house of the Lord this morning. I'd like to invite you, if you have brought a Bible, to turn to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to be looking through a couple of verses there. If you didn't bring a Bible, there's probably one under a pew somewhere that you can get to, and I just want to invite you to turn to that. We are kind of in a series looking through the Sermon on the Mount. And part of what we're doing as a community is reading a book called The Good and Beautiful Life. And we have been singing about that, right? And my understanding is that the good and beautiful life is happiness. That if we are happy, then we are enjoying a good and beautiful life. And Jesus gives us some instructions about that and how to achieve that. And we're just kind of looking at that as we go through this, what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, that starts in Matthew chapter 5. I said a couple weeks ago that Matthew chapter 5 starts with the Beatitudes, and the Beatitudes are similar to the Old Testament Ten Commandments. They serve a purpose of codifying the principles that God wanted his people to have in the Old Testament, and Jesus codifies for his people, for us as Christians, in the New Testament. They both documents unify people that embrace these statements. You knew that you were Jewish if you obeyed the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments separated you from the rest of the people. The Ten Commandments said that you were to have no other God but God. So no any spiritual God, there was only one. And you were to have no other physical gods, idols before you. That's the second commandment. And that differentiated Jews from pretty much everybody else. And Jesus also, Jesus is not as exclusionary. Jesus is embracing of everyone. Blessed are those who, and lists different things, some of which, like mourn, are difficult, poor in spirit. There are things that we deal with, and Jesus says, regardless of your circumstances, everyone is welcome. Now, I think, based on just kind of a couple things, and we'll take a look at these, but I think that Jesus had been reading in Deuteronomy 20, had been reading the Ten Commandments, had been reading the law as he prepared for this sermon. I'm not suggesting that Jesus had to prepare for a sermon like I have to prepare for a sermon. Jesus didn't have to read the scriptures and read commentaries and all of that. But I am suggesting that Jesus lived in the scriptures and that he read the scriptures and that he memorized the scriptures. I don't think that Jesus came as a little baby with a hard drive implanted in him that had all the scriptures there in the Unicode form, whatever. He was a smart boy, and he was a smart teenager, and he was a smart young adult, and he memorized at least the Pentateuch, if not the whole, what we call the Old Testament. And so he had to live with those scriptures. And when you're reading something, you tend to quote from it. You tend to be thinking about that. And I think that that's where Jesus was, and we get a variety of different things that he says because of it. Right after he lays out the Beatitudes, he says, and this is verse 17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Kevin preached on this a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's important that we realize that Jesus is thinking about the law and is going to refer back to it. And the first thing that he addresses has to do with murder and anger in that. And when he's talking about anger, and I'm not going to re-preach Kevin's sermon here, but one of the things he says is that you have to be better than the Pharisees, who were very intent on keeping the law. You've got to be better than them if you're going to be part of the kingdom of heaven. And everybody's going, wait, what? And that's what Jesus does. Jesus throws extremes out so that we will pay attention to the point. And that extravagance or pushing things, he does in that next section in verse 23 and verse 24. And there he says, if you have you're offering a gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave the gift there and go take care of it, be reconciled, and then come back. Now, we don't offer sacrifices when we come to church. We don't come bringing animals and little calves and sacrifice them. So we don't understand just how crazy this statement was of Jesus. I think if Jesus was here today and he was saying this, he would say, if you come and you're having your child baptized here, and you've got your whole family here, you've got the church family, and they're singing, Jacob, Jacob, God bless you, and the pastor is holding the baby, is about to put water on that baby's head, and you think of somebody, not that you're mad at, but that's mad at you, stop the whole thing. Say, preacher, excuse me, I need to make a phone call. Just everybody hold on. And he says, go and take care of what's going on. Ask forgiveness, whatever it is, and then come back and say, sorry, preacher, carry on. How many of you would do that? Seriously. None of y'all would do that. But Jesus says that's how important it is that our hearts not have anger in them. Go to that extreme to get rid of anger. Because if you do, you will be happy. You will not only fulfill the law, but it will satisfy you. You will become a whole different person. It's quite a lesson that he is teaching. And I think a lot of us resonate with this. We need to hear this about anger. Jesus said, this is verse 21, you've heard it said of people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Really? How many of you have killed somebody? You'd be in jail if you did. I was pretty sure nobody would raise your hand. How many of you have been angry? Sure, right? And you go, what? We're subject to judgment? Jesus says, if you want to fulfill the law, go to extremes in the other end. Don't even be angry at people. And then you will have the fulfillment of this law. And I think this speaks to all of us. And I know it does, because Janice was telling me 2 weeks ago, after Kevin had preached at the 9:30 service, she was down in Common Grounds cleaning up after coffee, and so she was late, but she wanted to go to Sunday school, and she went to one Sunday school class, and this is proper church etiquette, you all. If you're late to a Bible study, don't just barge in and say, hey, they might be praying, right? So you want to listen and see what's going on. And she did that, and there was intensity of conversation about anger in such that she didn't want to interrupt. It was that deep conversation. She went to another classroom, did the proper church thing, opened it, and the discussion was so deep, she didn't walk into that one. She went to 3 Sunday school classes and didn't walk in. She should have walked into one of them. But the point is that this affects all of us and is part of our lives. It is part of our culture. And we need to address these things. And Jesus says, called his disciples then and calls his disciples now to let go of anger. And in so doing, we find happiness. Jesus says, it's said of old, thou shalt not murder. I'm telling you, you're subject to judgment if you get angry. Now, it's very interesting that he does the exact same formula, uses the same logic, the same thinking around not commandment number 6, but commandment number 7. This is verse 27 of verse 5. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. That's the 10 Commandments again, right? But he says, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And everybody's going, wait, what? Again. They're like, now they're going like this for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that the guys are going, wait, what? Because they were not ever guilty of adultery. Men in first century Judaism were never guilty of adultery. Only women were. Does that sound fair? No. Listen, you remember the Pharisees want to trap Jesus. I heard some guy say yes over there. Yeah. The Pharisees bring a woman caught in adultery and bring her to him and say, our laws say we should stone her. What do you say? I was a teenager when I read this, and my first reaction to this was, where's the guy? Because it takes two to tango. But it turns out that only the seductress was the guilty one of adultery. And to that world, Jesus says, you've heard it said, thou shalt not commit adultery. I'm telling you, if you lust after a woman, guys, you'll be guilty of sin. All of a sudden, he's pointing his finger at the guys who deserve it. No need to hear it. But he stretches it to where, it's not just adultery, but it's thou shalt not lust. And guys and women today ask and have been asking me, so what is lust? And I want to define lust for you. I think that lust is looking at a person with the desire of self-gratification. That's what I think lust is. It's looking at a person, because if you're looking at a thing, that's called coveting. But if you look at a person, then you are lusting. So lust is about people. And yes, it's about sexuality. Yes, it is looking at a person sexually. But I think it's helpful just to think of it as looking at a person with desire and for self-gratification. And again, if you say looking at a thing with the desire of self-gratification, then you're talking about coveting. But if you're looking at a person, that's what it is. Now, in the book, Jim Smith says that lust is taking a second look. And I think that's helpful. You can be walking along on the beach and see somebody that's very attractive. That is not lust. That's just an observation. You have seen that person. It's what you do with the second look that determines whether you are lusting or not. Whoa. Suddenly you have changed from just information to desire, desiring something. Dallas Willard, who is kind of a mentor in all of certainly a mentor of Jim Smith, and to many of us, a brilliant guy, he said that lust is desiring to desire. It is looking with a desire to desire. Oh, I'm going to look at that person again, and I'm going to fantasize, I'm going to think about that person. And what happens when we do that is that we make an object out of that person, and we take from that person their personhood. All of us are guilty of this, but certainly men can do this very easily. Just look at a woman and make her an object of desire for self-gratification. And I think the whole #MeToo movement is women finally gaining some traction in saying, stop that. Don't do that. Don't objectify a person. Don't objectify a person based on their body or their body parts. Because bad things happen when you do that. I want to offer you a quote here from Anne Van Camp, who's actually a conservative blogger. But she said, when women are objectified, the tragedy is not only that women lose their dignity, but men lose their humanity. It is when we don't treat one another as human beings, as people created in the image of God, as equals that way, that we lose the very identity that God has built into us. We lose our humanity. And yes, the person that you're objectifying loses their dignity. But the person who is doing the objectifying loses part of who they are and who God intended them to be. And again, bad things happen when you do this. Y'all, it was only 2 weeks ago that this guy in Toronto, his name is Alec Minassian, do you remember this? Ran down 10 people in Toronto with a rented car. He was aiming at women. He wanted to kill women because he was mad at women that they weren't providing what he wanted from them. This is real, and the damage is real. That may be an extreme case. But Jesus calls us to honor one another, and when we look at one another, to not lust, to not desire that person for our own self-gratification. So the second question that I hear often is, so how do you do that? Usually coming from guys. And I have heard some aids in this process. One person said to me, well, what you do is you only look from the chin up. That's helpful advice. You look in the eyes of somebody, you look into their soul. I guess that's true. But I think you look and you pay attention to somebody and you connect in the way that God wants you to. And I suppose that if you look down, that things can change. Women, if you have a name tag, I guess put it on your forehead so that we don't, I'm not sure how this applies universally, right? Another one that I heard is that you do the bounce, the eye bounce. That as soon as you see someone that you are tempted to objectify, that you bounce off of them. Which is good advice. I think that's helpful, unless you're on Miami Beach and you're just going, this explains why a lot of older men just walk like this, and it's one way of avoiding the problems of the bounce. Another one that I heard is a 3-second rule, that you only get 3 seconds, and that's it. I'm not comfortable with this one, because let me show you what happens in 3 seconds. You see someone, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. You see what can happen in 3 seconds, right? I think what's more important is what happens with the 3 seconds afterwards. You look at a bunch of people, you forget them in 3 seconds. And so when you see someone, what sticks with you? What image stays? And I think that is something that I think may be more helpful. I'll tell you the one litmus test that I want to offer to all of you is, what is the thought that you have about this person? We'll get to coveting here in a minute. But what is it, what you think about this person? Is it leading you towards Jesus, or is it leading you away from Jesus? That is life in the kingdom. You're either walking towards him or you're walking away. And the call today is that we all walk towards Jesus. And allow that to be a litmus test. I just offer that to you as something to think about. Okay, so the parallel of adultery versus and with lust, I think is not only paralleled with murder and anger, but it is paralleled with stealing, which is commandment number 8, and coveting. Coveting is looking at a thing and objectifying that thing. Now, before I go there, I do have one picture that I have to share with you. I forgot this. I was doing research because I have to do research, right? And I went to Wikipedia and I was looking up a word. And this was the picture that came up for this word. What word do you think I was looking for? No. I heard some of you say lust. What? Stupid. No. I was looking up the word adultery. And this is the picture that Wikipedia put up for adultery. And I'm like, these people are listening to Jesus. I have found the truth in Wikipedia. Finally. Isn't it amazing that their definition of adultery means the second look? That's what's going on here. And look at the effect of the second look upon the partner. And look at the effect on the lady in red. She's just walking. It doesn't affect her at all. But I found this just an amazing picture and illustrative of what Jesus is talking about. Calling us to not be technical about it, but to bring the spirit of the freedom that Jesus wants us to have. The happiness that comes from not having these things in our lives, being able to have a good and beautiful life. You with me? I don't have a whole lot of time here. The same principle applies to things. I think in the United States, we live in a capitalistic, materialistic, consumeristic, oriented society. And we tend to think that pretty much if I want something, I can go get it. And that's just built into who we are. But there is a difference between, say, needing something and wanting something. And there's a difference between wanting something and desiring it for our self-gratification in something that we normally otherwise wouldn't be able to get, that we want, that somebody else has, that we want, that we can't otherwise get. The distinction may be a little nebulous, particularly for us who live in the first world and live with the affluence that we do. But I tell you, I experienced it. I was trying to come up with an example, and I came up with an example in my own life. This is going to just blow your minds, but it has to do with cars. You all know that I enjoy cars, and I enjoy looking at cars. I watch car shows, whatever. And I can look at somebody's car and enjoy it and just, talk all about it, but not want it or need it. But one day in 2006, we were in Naples, and I took my boys, and we went to the Porsche dealership. We're just hanging out, and I took them in there to go look at cars. And I saw this Porsche 911 Targa 4S in burnt bronze color and with a brown interior. And I just thought that thing was amazing. And I remember thinking, I wish that I could have this car. Something changed in me. Some kind of reaction changed in how I related with that thing. And I walked out of there angry that I didn't have it and that I could never have it. I didn't make enough money then, still don't, to be able to buy that car, right? And that what was going on inside of me was different. And this is what Jesus calls us to. Now, none of us have murdered anybody. Not everyone, some of us maybe have committed adultery. Most of us aren't going to steal. But I think we all know what it means to be angry. We know what it means to lust. And we also know what it means to covet, to know the difference between those. How many people do you know that work just to be able to buy stuff or to accumulate money? And Jesus says you can't be run by that. That stuff wastes away. And then you need more and more and more and more and more, and there's no end to it. And so I think that this business of coveting affects all of us. I think it affects corporations with intellectual property. I mean, there are all kinds of applications that I think we should be aware of in our own lives. But again, Jesus asks us to let go of that. And I want to finish with just what I think is the antidote to all of this. I mean, certainly asking, is it drawing me closer to Jesus or farther away, is important. But also, I think our attitude towards what God has given to us matters a lot. If we are grateful people, if we are grateful for what God has given to us in other people, and in things, in life, if we concentrate on being grateful for what God has given, we will then let go of coveting, of lusting, and of anger. And I don't think it's coincidental that we come to the table today and the ritual around the table is called the Great Thanksgiving. What are we grateful for? What are we giving thanks for? We are giving thanks for the greatest gift that has ever been offered to us. A gift of salvation, the gift of the potential of getting rid of all of that because God lives in us and empowers us to do so. So when you come here, I want to invite you to engage that muscle called gratitude and allow it to flourish. You'll be amazed at what it pushes out. And y'all, I'm going to ask the ushers to come and to bring down for us, this is kind of out of sequence, but I'm going to ask them to lay 2 baskets down here with butterflies in them. If you weren't able to fill a butterfly out last week, I invite you to do so. But as you come to the altar, if you want to express a prayer of thanksgiving that you want to see as part of an artistic expression of our prayers going up to heaven, take one of these, fill it out, and then put it in a different basket. There are baskets around, and just deposit them there, and we will incorporate that into the artwork. Let's pray together. Lord, the great thanksgiving is giving thanks to you for the work that you did in Jesus Christ, and giving thanks that he came and considers equality with you not something to be grasped, but emptied himself completely, even unto death on a cross. And that he shared his body with us. He made himself the sacrifice that we might be able to approach you and to lead a good and beautiful life. So Lord, we gather as a people, mindful that on that night you took bread and you broke it, gave thanks, and said to your disciples then and to your disciples now, this is my body which is broken for you. Eat in remembrance of me. And likewise on that night you took a cup, and in looking in the texture and the color of that, what was in that cup, you turned to your disciples then and now and said, this is my blood which is shed for you. Drink as often as you would in remembrance of me. So Lord, it is with grateful hearts that we approach your altar. And Lord, if there are things that we need to let go of, if there are things that we need, the people that we need to be reconciled with, I pray that we would go to extremes to make that happen and to come here ready to receive the gift. We offer these prayers to you in Jesus' name.